Hello, everyone. Welcome to part two of our in-depth look at the lovely Cessna 172, my experiences flying in it, and just some general advice with it. Today, we're going to be concentrating everything about kind of cruise and navigation, and we're also going to take a look a little bit about getting ready for descent. Let's go get started. So this aircraft, we're making our way up to our cruise altitude of 4,500 feet. And one of the things I forgot to mention last time, which is kind of funny, is this aircraft has electric trim on it, which is cool because in the old days we had this little wheel for trim. Now, if you're an awful person, you can actually just use your feet like I am right now, and you can actually pitch trim the plane very, very precisely without touching your joystick if you're one of those people. Of course, we want to be mindful of things like that. Another thing is somebody pointed out is the danger of leaning a mixture inclined because it hurts the cooling ability of the engine. So it's always something you want to temper yourself with, depending, of course, what generation of engine you're dealing with, how new the engine is, and all those other factors outside air temperature, stuff like that. So we've gone ahead and reached a cruise altitude of 4,500. I'm going to go ahead and push the nose down. One of the things that always surprised me about the Cessna 172 is how little effort it took to transition from a climb to a cruise. Basically, you put the nose down a little bit and you push the yoke. Just a little bit of pressure is all it took. You didn't have to do anything fancy at all to kind of get it. Now, one thing you're probably observing here is the fact that I'm leaving the throttle pushed all the way in before making my reduction to cruise power. This is an important concept for us because it's going to save us a lot of frustration, as you'll see in a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and give ourselves a couple thwacks of trim. I'm going to engage the automatic pilot just for the purposes of kind of a navigation here today. And that's just going to hold us at this altitude to make it simpler. So what we're going to do is set the power now. Now, one of the interesting things about the green arc of this airplane is the green arc is actually different shapes depending on what altitude you are. Once you cross 5,000 feet, for example, your altitude actually changes a little bit. You have a different maximum RPM reach. 5,000 feet, between sea level and 5,000, 2,600 is kind of the nasty spot. Once, of course, you exceed 10,000 feet, 2,700 RPM becomes kind of the please don't go past that point kind of a thing like that, just to give you an idea of how that sort of changes depending on sort of what you're up to. Turn down the noise a little bit. So setting cruise power on this aircraft is interesting. One of the things we can do, of course, is we can consult the book. And the book, of course, will say, well, if you're this temperature and this set and this one of these and one of those and one of these, you, of course, have everything that you need to know. One of the nice things about the Cessna 172, though, is it's pretty easy to actually figure out what kind of power that you need for a particular setting just by kind of looking at the arc itself. One of the things you'll notice as we look down at this arc is the fact that we've kind of got that green spot, we've kind of got that nasty spot, and then it just kind of goes downhill or uphill, depending exactly who you're asking to from there. Now, one of the cool things with this one is I always try to think of it in terms of 26, 25, 24. Anything under that is simply going to be something we'd only be using at low altitude. What do I mean? 2,600 RPM is going to be our absolute maximum power we could ever use. This is going to get us plenty. Keep in mind, because we're at higher altitudes, we have less air pressure, so that's going to have a big impact on it. This is peak performance on this aircraft. We're going to be going about as fast as we can safely get this thing. Now, if that's pretty good, we don't want to go peak performance here. The next RPM down for us would be down here at 2,500 RPM. 2,500 RPM to me is like the magical medium of I just need an RPM that's a safe RPM. We're not going too fast. We're not going too slow. I don't need to worry about it. Then down from there, of course, would be your 55% power, which again, depending on altitude, would be somewhere between 23 and 24, depending on what you want. If you want to kind of split the differences, you can kind of stick it right here. Now, one of the interesting things is this aircraft allows you to cruise as low as 2,100 RPM, which is going to be a very short, let's say low speed and very, very long endurance, if that's the desire. But ideally, we probably want to keep it somewhere up in this sort of arc that we have right here. For me, if you're just looking for a quick setting here, 25 usually gets you around 65% power if you don't know. Now, one of the things we had to do when we started climbing this aircraft is setting the mixture correctly. We've talked about this in our previous videos before, but the mixture is a bit of a pain in the butt. The first couple times you try it, you'd panic because in the old days you had the carburetor. So if the mixture was set right, the engine would sound like it wants to shut off. That means you got it right. In this aircraft, we have to use a tool called an EGT. And here's how you would do this. Basically, you take this little red knob here and you go ahead and stick it in an arbitrary value. What I would do is I take whatever the current is, and this looks pretty good here. And what I would do is start pulling out the red handle. And what I would do is study what the EGT is going to do. What you'll observe here is my fuel flow is going to drop. It's actually going to get into the green. And what I do is I pause. Go ahead and take the ref EGT, and then you're just going to set it so that you can see exactly the new peak. You can actually see how it's slowly climbing here. You can actually hear my RPM increasing also, which is very typical. So go ahead and pull this out, pull it out, and I think we found the peak. And peak's going to be right about there. I think that was about where it stopped going up. And yeah. So after you do that, of course, that's your peak. We're not allowed to fly lean a peak, what they call. So I can't pull this mixture handle out any further. That would be no-no. But we are allowed to operate 25 rich a peak, which is generally where you want to be. So after we found kind of that sweet spot that we're marking, we're just going to go like this until up. Oh, I guess I was a little bit further back from the peak than it. Actually, I was pretty close. What am I saying? We're just going to go like this until we hit that next line that you kind of have directly below it. Now, the interesting thing is this process is a little different in the real world. It's going to feel different. The sim is very mechanical, and it's just not like that. There's things you can hear. One of the other things you probably observed is our RPM has actually climbed up substantially because now that the air-fuel mixture is mixing a little bit better. So one of the things we can actually do is we can pull that sucker back just a tiny bit to kind of get that set. Delightful. So now that that's all done, let's go ahead and take a look at getting somewhere here. So we're going to be going up to Poughkeepsie. Poughkeepsie is awesome. It's one of my, I was trying to think this is sort of my generic, where would I go if I just wanted to go flying somewhere? And this would be it. And you can actually see that without any knowledge of where I was, you can see the airplane just wants to go there because in the real world, I've flown there so many darn times. I'll go ahead and flip us over to nav mode. Oh, got to make sure we're not suspended or anything like that. We'll go to nav mode. There it goes. Delightful. And the aircraft will now take a nice gentle turn, and it'll start taking us in the general direction of our good friend over there, Poughkeepsie. Now, the cool thing here is this is a nice GPS. I've done plenty of videos on these. I'm not going to go too far with this. I like this view better because it's going to kind of give me all the critical information. So inside the Cessna 172, we have a wide variety of different instruments for the purposes of navigation and kind of getting where we need to get, so to speak. The key one, of course, is we have ourselves a directional gyro. Now, one of the interesting things about your directional gyro here is it is a gyro that precesses. As a matter of fact, one of the things you'll observe here is if I take my compass and zoom in a little bit, you'll see that my compass right now is reading that we're going at about, that'd be 266 degrees. Now, if I were to float down here to my directional gyro, you'll probably observe that we're not going 266 degrees. We're going about 269 degrees. Now, that 3 degrees is the equivalent of, let's see here, 4 miles, 3 miles at 60 miles, which is pretty substantial. That's a bad problem. So one of the things we do once we finally get the plane level is we reset this to this. Now, of course, the modern version is you don't have to put up with any of these things. One of the cool things is Flight Sim actually provides you the D key that you can press to automatically reset that for you. And you can see now the two are corresponding with each other. It's just kind of one of those little quirks of the older versions, especially if you had an old gyro. These, like, you had to change these every 10-15 minutes. Otherwise, you just and slowly lose its accuracy, which could be really, really bad for us, like I said. So it's just kind of one of those little things that it's like, oh, that could be problematic, so to speak. And I noticed my mixture has changed since the last time I said it. Don't do this to me, man. Don't do this to me. And one of the cool things is you could actually set this based on the power setting and stuff like that, but I'm not going to mess with that. It'd be too much work. The other tools we'd have in a Cessna 172, other than our directional gyros, depending on what version you'd have, of course, you'd have access to these lovely little CDIs. Now, these are great because they basically could take an electronic signal to tell us how close to being on course we are. We can actually see very closely here, just taking a quick little gander at it. By the way, these needles are not very steady. They're very, very, very steady in the sim here. But in the real world, they go, ah. Every little bump makes them go, okay, kind of a thing like that. And they're actually not the world's most stable things at all. But one of the cool things I really appreciate about this is the fact that we have the ability, in this particular aircraft, to each one of these is linked to its own device. Now, in the real world, by the way, we could actually set this GPS to a different destination if we wanted. But one of the cool things here, of course, is we have the ability to manipulate this and actually pick different positions. So if I were to go like that, for example, I'm pretty sure I'm in range. Yeah, there we go. We could use this as a way to actually triangulate your position just by basically comparing it at the same time. I'm actually going from, not to. So in any second, this thing's going to wham and go sliding across. Oh, there it goes. Told you. So we can see very, very clearly that, it's 156 degrees from our current position. It'll actually read that off to you if that was something I selected. Now, check this out. I'll just show this to you real quick while I'm navigating right here. Boop. Oh, so close. So close. I love that. Love that. So as we're cruising here, of course, this would be the relaxing part of the flight. We get our mixture set, whatever tools we're using to navigate, we're using, everything's going okay. We're monitoring our temperatures and pressures to make sure they're okay and things like that. One thing we'd be checking for, of course, as we're going here is that for traffic, that's basically in the real world, all I ever do is look for traffic if I'm not looking at the instruments. That's just what you do. We have a great ADS-B now, and it makes it much, much simpler to actually see things that are kind of flying by us. I used to drive this road over here to get to work. It was kind of fun times. So one of the things is you're always looking out for traffic so you don't get mowed down by them. Because once you get away away from the popular spots, you end up on these airways and people just kind of get in your way, and that can be very, very dangerous to us. So we always want to kind of be somewhat mindful of that. But the cruise process of this plane is pretty painless. You just get your flight following, you do your pieces. One thing that I'd have to do in the real world today that we wouldn't see in the sim is you have this thing, this is cabin heat. What they don't tell you about this, of course, is you don't ever have to pull this out this far unless like you're just starting. Normally what you do is you'd open it up, you feel it get warm, and then you push it closed and you pull it out that much. That would be enough heat to basically melt your face. And the other thing everybody forgets to do, of course, is that they don't close these, so it gets very, very, very warm, or it gets very, very, very cold, or somebody didn't close the door all the way, and it just, kind of gets kind of interesting, so to speak. Oh, I guess I want to hit the thing. I accidentally went to a different menu. Fixed it, so that just gives you an idea what that is. So what I'm going to do now is I'll fast forward to descent, and we'll go over that process. There are basically a couple different ways to get this plane down. During flight training, of course, you tried slip descents, where you'd pull the power out, pull the car ready heat on, basically put the thing into a dive, and try not to exceed 130 knots, was kind of the general gist. The more standard descents, of course, so what you basically are going to do is you're going to go ahead and pull the throttle back, basically pinky's width, and then you just push the nose over until you get up to about 120 knots, which is a pretty hefty speed. Now, one of the things I always struggled with in my early days of flying, of course, even this plane, of course, when I moved to the Mooney, this was all moot because it's a lot faster plane. But one of the things you would do, of course, is try to figure out when do we go down. The cool news is we have ourselves a distance, we have ourselves a time. 500 feet per minute is the magical amount of speed to use generally. So coming over here right now, I can see we're about 4,500 feet. We're a little high, that's fine. 45, of course, is going to be subtracted by 1,000 for field elevation. That's 35. 35 divided by 5 is going to give us 7. It means it's going to take 7 minutes to get to our target altitude. That's pretty handy. That's actually good because we know 3.5 minutes will do it at 1,000 feet per minute should we need it. Now, one of the cool things about this GPS here is I know my estimated time en route is going to be there, which makes it much, much easier to basically kind of get set up for that sort of early. The other thing, of course, you could do with this GPS is you could actually set it. One of the things we do, kind of one of our chores we'd be doing while we're getting ready for descent, is trying to find the other airport. One of the things that I've learned, like I said, future Phil kind of a thing like that, would know that when we start getting close to an airport, that doesn't mean it's time to descend. We need to be in a situation where if I lost an engine right now, I could safely survive. If I started descending now, keep in mind there's some terrain here, number one. The second thing is, if I lost my engine and I was kind of down here, this is a very, very dangerous place to try to set us down. Basically mess us up. So I'll fast forward to the 7-minute point. There we go. So now what I would do in the real world, of course, autopilot comes off, and all I would do is stick the nose down, and I would pull the power back, like I said, about basically a pinky was all it would take in the real world. Your actual simulator, probably about 100 RPM is probably going to be enough. So what you would do now is you basically push the nose over, and go ahead and start enriching the mixture. Keep in mind, as you start to descend and you start to put more and more mixture into the airplane, what's going to happen is, of course, it's going to cause your RPM to change because, again, it won't be the ideal mixture at the moment. But you can see I got that sucker jammed up all the way, and I'm just going to pull out basically a thumb worth because that's going to be plenty until we have to get down to the ground. So basically what I'm doing here is if you take a look at my current settings, is I've got 500 feet per minute more or less, and you can see I'm literally sitting right on the yellow arc. That means I'm doing an okay job today, which is pretty good. If it was very turbulent, I wouldn't do it this aggressively. I just wouldn't take any chances. And if you see yourself start to creep into that yellow arc, you can either lift the nose up, or you can, like I said, pull another 100 RPM off. You can actually see that this thing's basically full power right now. There we go. It looks pretty good. Nice. Just give this thing a moment to slow down, and there we go. We're coming down really, really nicely. So this is an excellent combination of basically preventing the engine from getting too cold on the way down. It's also going to be pretty comfortable for your passengers. Passengers don't love 500 feet per minute, but it beats 1,000 feet per minute at the last second. So I'm going to go ahead and stick my nose down. I'm just going to go ahead and tap the automatic pilot on. Autopilot traps whatever you're doing last. So, of course, I can switch back to nav mode. Notice VS was captured at 500 feet per minute. And look at that. I can sit here and relax and get ready to do other things. One of the big things for us, of course, would be contacting ATIS, making sure all that stuff is ready to go. We'd be kind of talking to them sort of when we get close. If you're talking to air traffic control, I should say, TRACAN, usually it would be Boston. We'd be in New York at this point. They'd be calling you and saying, do you see the runway? And you're like, Poughkeepsie in sight. And they say, contact tower XYZ. And then you contact the tower and, of course, get ready. The other thing, of course, we'd be doing here is running through the whole process of getting our ATIS, finding out what our weather's going to be, everything along those lines, and kind of getting that all set up for us, ready to go. So that's all pretty much all set. We got all those things ready. We're going to continue our descent here. This looks like a pretty good place to go ahead and pause because their next phase of the course of operating this lovely little quirky plane is going to be to get down on the ground. And we'll take a look at that next time. Enjoy.